Baby owl hugged for help. Then they realized the reason, and they were shocked. On a beautiful spring day, Charlie and his motorcycling friends decided to ride through the local forest. As they drove down the winded country road, they were suddenly stopped by a tiny, trembling owl that looked exhausted and famished. It seemed that the recent rain had separated the cub from its family and left it vulnerable and alone. Filled with compassion, Charlie had no hesitation in contacting both the Conservation Service and the police, who were quickly on the scene to help with the rescue. The cub was carefully taken to a professional sanctuary where it received the care and affection it needed to hopefully be released back into the wild one day. After making sure that the little owl was in good hands, Charlie and his friends continued on their trip through the woods. The group spent the lovely day together, but Charlie couldn't get the baby owl out of his head. He kept wondering how the little bird was doing. A few weeks later, Charlie couldn't resist the urge to catch up with the baby owl's development. He contacted the Conservation Authority and inquired about the condition of the owl. The staff invited him to visit the bird himself. When he arrived, he was amazed at the transformation. The once trembling and lost hatchling had become a majestic bird with glowing plumage and piercing eyes. However, staff did voice their concerns about the animal to Charlie. They informed him that the owl at this stage of development should have the ability to fly, but the hatchling had not yet attempted to do so. The keeper explained to Charlie that the owl was physically fine, but she needed a lot of nurturing and attention to thrive mentally and emotionally. Ever since the day he saved the little bird, he felt responsible for it. He then decided to visit the sanctuary regularly to check on the owl to see if there's anything he could do to help. Over the next few weeks, Charlie spent a lot of time at the center, helping to care for the bird. He learned how to feed the owl and clean its cage, and he was even allowed to hold its hands. Over time, Charlie grew more and more fond of the owl. He considered her his own pet and looked forward to visiting her every single day. One day, while feeding the bird, Charlie noticed that the owl was looking at him with bright eyes. He had the feeling that she wanted to tell him something, but he wasn't sure what. Suddenly, the owl flapped its wings and hopping around its cage. Charlie had come to the realization that the owl had reached a stage where they fly and could be returned to their natural habitat. The Wildlife Conservation Service supervisor shared his view. However, they were unsure about the release since the owl had never attempted to fly. Still, it was worth a try. Staff made arrangements for the owl's release and moved it to a subtle location in the forest. When they opened the cage, the owl hesitated at first, but after a few moments rose into the air and soared into the sky. Charlie and the keepers watched in awe as the owl circled overhead, then disappeared into the dense forest. The man filled with knowledge that he had helped the little owl find its way back into the wild. He was sad to see him go, but he knew that he had done the right thing. But as soon as Charlie turned around, he felt a draft and a familiar swoosh of feathers in his face. The owl had returned and perched on his shoulder, where it screeched softly. Caregivers were amazed, as it is a rare occurrence for a wild bird to return to a human. Charlie realized that the owl had developed a special bond with him and felt a great gratitude towards the bird. But the professionals weren't as lucky as him. Most animal shelters want their animals to be safe back in the wild and were disappointed when they fail. The keepers suspected that the animal had become too dependent on human care and no longer had the skills to survive in the wild, so they brought her back to the center. Charlie, feeling responsibility for this development, offered to give the owl a home if they weren't able to live in the wild. Staff agreed that doing so would be beneficial for the bird. Charlie went home to make preparations. He promised to return the next day to collect the owl he affectionately called Hoot. However, when he drove off the following day, he had no idea what would happen next. As Charlie approached Hoot's cage to take him out, he heard a faint call from nearby trees. Suddenly, a majestic owl swooped down and landed on the cage. She looked just like Hoot, but she was bigger and stronger. One of the volunteers realized it was another little owl that they assumed was Hoot's mother. The mother owl had been looking for the cub and finally found it. Just as Charlie was reaching for the cage lock to free the fledgling bird, something shocking happened that left everyone speechless. They all watched in amazement as the mother owl used her beak to open the cage. Hoot crawled out, looked at the larger bird for a few seconds, and seemed to recognize his mother. The owl looked at Charlie and let out a thankful squeak before taking off into the woods with her baby. Charlie felt a wild mix of emotions. He was sad his friend was leaving. He was also happy that the owl was also returned with its mother. It was a moment he would never forget. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.